today we're talking about using your SEBL data to problem solve. Thank you for joining us on this, post Valentine's Day, February 15th. As a reminder, this is who we are. So my name is Emily Arkfeld. I serve Region 5 currently, ESUs 13, 15, and 16. And my background is school social work. Mackenzie, I see you.
Yep, I'm Mackenzie Rydell. I'm also an SEBL specialist serving Region 1 and 2, and I come from school psychology.
Perfect. And I'm the third SEBL specialist. I'm Jill Gunther. I serve regions 3 and 4. So that's ESUs 1, 7, 8, and then 9, 10, 11, and 17. And my background is speech language pathology and special education.
Thank you both. Okay. So what we do beyond these Coffee Connects once a month, we really work to provide support to our ESUs and our districts around exploring and implementing social emotional behavioral learning. We do that through providing evidence-based professional development, really, working specifically looking at data and what are your needs and how can we help build that around there. So we can do training and support in that. Just what is SEBL? How do we even get started in it? Really focusing on the adults and how do we take care of our adults to make sure that they in turn can care and support our students. Looking at that student core SEBL, what are we doing at the universal level for all of our students to build social emotional behavioral learning? And then how do we tier those supports for any students that might need that? So talking today, we're going to start our welcome and inclusion today. We just want to know, how comfortable are you with data? So if you just drop this in the chat, that would be fantastic. Are you like at that one of like, what would that even look like? Or two, like, yep, I'm a data guru, give it to me and let's really dive in. So if you just take a second and drop that in the chat for us, that would be great. Thank you all. We've got, so if there are things as we go along here, I know we've got some of our PBIS coaches and our consultant on today. So if you guys see things that you want to share, early childhood as well, how this works in the work you're doing and what you've seen in examples, please feel free to drop that in there so we can all learn from you guys as we go also. This is also a reminder, we have the Padlet. It is getting very large now with all of our resources and Coffee Connects and recordings. So anything we talk about today, and then I think there are some additional resources as well, are all linked in this Padlet. This is available to anybody. So if you know people that can't make it to these, don't have time to watch the recordings, please feel free to share the Padlet with them so that they still just have some resources that they can use and share out in their work as well. When we think about social emotional behavioral learning, Nebraska NeMTSS has defined it as the systematic process of fostering social emotional skills among students and adults. Like we talked about, we need to take care of our adults in order to create those safe and supportive environments with positive behavioral and mental health outcomes for all. If you haven't been with us for a little bit, we have added in the mental health outcomes because we know that, again, behavior, mental health, social emotional learning, all of these things are intertwined and they all build upon each other and support one another. And here is our other image to show that we need these competencies, these ones from Castle that we've adapted, self-awareness, self-management, responsible decision-making, relationships, and social awareness. Really to, if we want our students and our adults to be able to meet the expectations we have for them in our schools. And if we want them to be that college and career ready. So looking at that pre-K, early childhood, all the way through graduation, what are the skills that we want our students to have? And how do we then, once they have those skills, how do they then follow the expectations and the values we have set for them in our school also? Here is our web. We have it broken out a little bit more because we know that these competencies are a little high level constructs. And so what does that really mean? And so we like to break them down into those individual skills, because when we talk to educators, when we talk to parents about what do you want your kids to know, who do you want your kids to be, these are the kinds of skills that come up. And so we want to make sure that we're making that connection of these are the things that we all want for our students and our adults. We also have, if you've been on our social media lately or been in any trainings, we've had some major revisions that have come out and some fantastic new resources for everyone. So we started with our 6 essential elements, and then in part of our coherence work in building the alignment across the state at NDE and all of the different offices and what they're doing. We really focused and took some feedback, and so we narrowed it down to 4. So it's not getting rid of anything. We have combined some of our essential elements. So now we have infrastructure and shared leadership, layered continuum of supports, database decision-making, and that collaboration and communication. So on this slide, these are all live links, so you can go to learn about each of these. With that also comes our new framework. And so that is linked in here. It has a glossary with, you know, how we are defining certain terms across the state so that all departments at the NDE are using the same language to help streamline that for our districts and our schools. So it's not like, I think this is what they're asking me, but I think this is what they're asking me, and maybe that's the same, but I'm not sure. So we're trying to eliminate that, make it easier for everyone to understand. So the blog post about the update and the new framework is in there, and then also the new framework. So lots of links in this one for you guys. Along with the new framework, we have revised our problem-solving model to a 5-step problem-solving model, again, to better align with continuous improvement framework and activities across the offices. And so that is linked in here today, and then we will talk through that a little bit in the data that we are looking at as well.
All right, so we're going to talk about data and problem solving a lot today. And this really hones in on that database decision-making essential element. And so we're going to go through these 4 sections. We're going to talk about student and adult data, problem solving at various levels, including district and school level, the content and grade level, and that student support level. Talk about layered continuum of supports, and then progress monitoring. So we'll just dive right into data. So when we think about using data, we really want to focus on having a balanced assessment system. So what that means is using a comprehensive approach to really create an accurate picture of what our school, what our student learning looks like. So we want to use multiple data sources to really create that full picture. So you want to use summative data, maybe state level, interim or benchmark data, and then formative and classroom level data. And you really put it all together to create that big picture of what our schools or our students or classrooms are looking like. So you have your student data, which is learning and well-being, demographic, and perceptual, and then adult data, which is perceptual and process data. So when we think about student data, you have your student learning and well-being. This includes all different types listed here. So formative, interim, summative. You could use the universal screening data, diagnostic data, progress monitoring, grades, health, attendance, office referrals, all of those things. When we think of perceptual data, that would be more culture and climate or engagement surveys that the students are providing, like their opinion and their voice. And then demographics includes a lot of different areas that you might think about: race, gender, ethnicity, graduation rate, mobility, enrollment, attendance, all of those things that kind of mark their students' identities. So when we think about adult data, we think about that process data and that perceptual data. So process data could be that tier 1 fidelity. You might look at a needs assessment or a gap analysis to kind of see where those gaps are that we could work towards. And then also perceptual, so culture and climate, and also learning and well-being. This kind of hits on that adult wellness piece. We talk a lot about adult SEBL and how we can't just support our kids around SEBL, but we really have to support our adults to help them have the skills that they need to teach the students, and also to foster their well-being, because we know if the adults aren't feeling safe and well in the building, it's going to be hard for our students to feel safe and well. And so we have here listed a bunch of different data sources. You may have seen this slide before. I think when people think about SEBL or SEL data, they tend to initially think about something that they might not collect yet, but in reality, schools collect a lot of data. And so we're wanting to pull from some of the data we have. And if there's something that you're really wanting to look at that is very like SEBL competency focused, you can really, you can pull from this, but you could also maybe do like a specific competency survey or something like that. But I guess the big picture is we have a lot of data and we can use that as indicators for the social emotional health of our school. And so you'll see here, it's broken down into some system functioning, some of those bigger picture, some of those survey perceptual measures, and then the student academic functioning really gets into those grades, benchmarks, expulsion, suspension, ODRs, attendance, and then social emotional mental health functioning. You have more perceptual nurse visits, counseling, school resource officer visits, student well-being, relationships, risk behaviors, housing and food insecurity, things like that. And then your climate survey, we have a bunch linked in here, but we wanted to include climate as well because a lot of schools do collect that. And it is very valuable information as far as thinking about the climate and culture of the entire school. So now that we have a little bit better picture of what those data sources might look like, we want to talk about problem solving. And Emily showed the new problem solving model, the 5-step process. So we'll that would be the process that you engage in throughout these. But we want to hit home that problem solving isn't something that just occurs with our student support around individual students. It's really something that should happen across all teaming levels. And so if you've seen this image before, we have a picture of what teaming might look like in your district. So you would have a district leadership team, a school leadership team, collaborative teams, which might be grade level, content level, and then your student support teams. And you can see the different colors and they kind of mix together because we really want to make sure in our teaming process, we have that fluidity across levels. And so your district team is communicating with the school teams, who's communicating to collaborative teams, and then like vice versa. So your collaborative teams can communicate with your school leadership teams. And ideally you would have some representation on each one. So you have that fluid communication across different levels. So when we think about problem solving at the district or school level, we think typically that tier 1, this would be the focus on the more of like the system. How are we supporting all students across all levels? You typically wouldn't be problem solving around specific student needs, but more big picture needs. And so as a district team, you might ask yourself, how could we improve the system to better support the outcomes for students? And then a school team might focus more on how is our school implementation going? How can we support that to support all students better? And that would include students in all tiers, but really the big picture, like, is our system working? What might we need to do as far as like, what is our data telling us to working towards the goals that we have as a school or as a district? What might we need to do to help support our staff better? And so on the next slide, you can see the data that we're using. That might be your district DSFI around PBIS, maybe a TFI if you're a school level. You could look at graduation rate, overall proficiency rate of your students academically, maybe look at behavior data school climate data, staff wellness, maybe BOQ or in early childhood benchmarks of quality or gold data. And that information is used to inform your professional development that you might be planning. Maybe it helps indicate what collaborations you might need to engage in or really foster or strengthen. It might inform your curriculum design or some instructional practices. So again, this is really kind of that zoned out level. How are your systems working and how are you using the big picture data to inform the implementation and the build out and support of those systems. So then zooming in a little bit, problem solving at the collaborative and student support teams, that really focuses on those tier 2 and tier 3 supports. It could also focus on that tier 1, but it would be more of the classroom or content level. And so a collaborative team, they might look at their curriculum planning or their integration of SEBL practices across their grade or their classroom or grade bands. And so it's reinforcing those tier 1 supports, but then also you might look at tier 2, some of the students that might need extra support. And so they're focusing on the instruction. How can we improve our instruction to support all students, but also what students might need tier 2 support and what might that look like. And then your student support teams, those are really focused more on individual student needs. And so you might ask, how do we improve our instruction to support those students in tier 3? And then what does that look like? What do we focus on? Are we really intensifying that to meet the need of the students? And so at the student support level, it's important to remember that students aren't necessarily the subject of the problem solving, but that the supports that you provide or don't provide to the students are the focus of problem solving. So you're talking about, yes, the student is like of topic, but you're really problem solving. How are you supporting that student? What are you doing? And in problem solving, we always want to focus on things that are within the school's control, talk about the thing that we're seeing, and then really get into those next steps of action planning, creating a plan, and then implementing the plan and seeing how it's going. So talking about the problem, but staying away from that problem admiration. And so when we think about using that data, you could use screening data, academic data, ODRs. You could use some of the same data that you're using at the higher level, but it's zoned in a little bit more into just the grade that you're supporting, or maybe just the science, if you're a science teacher and you meet with the other science teachers, or you might look at office discipline referrals for your class or your grade. And so it is kind of big picture, but also honed in a little bit more specifically, less on the system implementation and more on the, I guess, still implementation, just at the zoned in level. And so that would inform also, just like the tier 1 problem solving at the leadership level, your professional development, your curriculum design, collaboration, and instructional practices. It might look a little different here, but it also would help inform your intervention implementation. Is it going as planned? Is it not? What might we need to do if we're not seeing the results we want? Are we hitting the skills that we want? It could inform your coaching. It could show that maybe we need support around de-escalation because we have a lot of students that are eloping in the classroom. Something like that could inform needing more coaching supports. It could also trigger further assessment of something if you see that it is becoming a higher need maybe in your grade than it is in another grade. What are we doing to assess it? Maybe those tier 3 might need extra assessment to help inform what interventions you might do. And then also community partnerships and referrals at that tier 3 level. It's important to bring all stakeholder voices in. And so we want to do that across all tiers, but if we're looking at referring out or really wrapping around the student and supports, that would help inform some of those referrals and partnerships to be created. So then layered continuum of supports, so that's tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3. And just that the problem solving process, like I mentioned before, should be used across all teaming structures and not just as a pathway to get special education. We're really wanting to problem solve around the big picture and then those needs within the district, school, and collaborative team levels, as well as the student level, to help create a system that is proactive, positive, preventative, and really supportive across the big picture, and then also supporting students who might need more support, more individualized support. So we have some resources moving forward here, and so we'll review some of those. This first one is a database decision-making flow chart. It's on the next slide. So this is just a blank form. It's kind of just a process to walk through decision-making process. So it has some areas where you can write down what data you've collected and then help analyze that data with what patterns exist. Is there disproportionality? What is our student need telling us? And then some different interventions you would fill in the box if you're doing an intervention like what you did, and then come back together to discuss, is it working? Do we continue this? Do we modify? Do we fade it? Do we graduate from that intervention? And so it's kind of a walkthrough. As you're working through this as a team, it can be helpful to keep on track, just to project it and fill it out as you go. And this would be more for those tier 2 and tier 3 meetings, but in the beginning, that first slide with the problem solving model, when we showed the new five-step one, that one, it had a resource linked as well, and it was walking through the process of each step, and it had some questions, and there's a blank box you could fill it in. So that would also be a good resource if you're wanting a resource to help you walk through the process at more of a systems level. We threw in projected capacity, and we'll talk a little bit about serviceable base rate too, but the projected capacity is kind of just a grounding number, frame of reference for the ideal support you would give across tiers. And so an example here, you would ideally want your core, your tier 1 to support the needs of 75 to 80% of your students, and then plan for about 10 to 25% needing some more intensified support, and then less than 10% needing that tier 3. So this isn't necessarily like this is going to be what our school looks like, but just kind of a big picture of when we're thinking about our system, we want to support X number of students. So this example would have a school of 400, and ideally you'd want 300 to 320 of them to respond well to that core instruction, and then anticipate 40 to 100 of the students needing potentially needing extra support. And then your serviceable base rate, we know that sometimes our needs look different in schools based on the location of our school, the capacity of our staff. I know some districts have instructional coach and a social worker and a counselor and a school psych, and some just have a counselor that does it all, and they might not have an instructional coach. And so it really just looks different across buildings. So your serviceable base rate is the number of school students your school realistically serves. So this would be dependent on really your capacity as a building or a school. So it might depend on the interventions you have available, the number of students that are needing support, the time, material, personnel, all of those things that really determine what your system looks like. And so when thinking about your serviceable base rate, you would kind of map it out similar to the last one, but then like what can you realistically do? And you would do this by mapping out your interventions that you have and how many students you think that could support. And that can help inform what supports you might give. So this picture, the top says universal screening. It's a great example if you're doing universal screening, but also not specific. So you could use discipline referrals or any other kind of source of data. But big picture is if you're showing, if your students are showing a big need and you're not able to meet that need through the realistic ability, your serviceable base rate to provide those interventions, then your need is higher than what you can do through interventions. Your system would be flooded. So you would really want to focus in on that core tier 1 practice, maybe providing some professional development, and really targeting that core because that's where we're going to get the most bang for our buck. If you have need and you can meet that need, but there's pockets, then you would focus on doing core well to help continue that, like equality of need versus ability to serve. But then you would focus in on those pockets. So if you have a 5th grade that has a ton of office referrals, instead of trying to intervene with like small groups of a bunch of 5th graders, doing an intervention with the 5th grade to help target that. And then your base rate equals your serviceable base rate. You're able to fit that need. There's no certain pockets of need. Then you would just do strong core and you would provide those tier 2 and tier 3 supports. So basically that scenario, your system is meeting the needs of your students, and you just kind of keep going and then just sustain and continuously improving your system. So if you have questions, it's kind of sciencey there. Our screen, intervene, and everything in between, it was focused on universal screening, but we go through that with some questions to ask if you want to dive a little deeper into that. Then we talk about decision rules. These are really those data rules that we want to use to lead the problem solving process in the teams. And so asking how do you determine if your core is effective? How do you decide if students are at risk? What does that look like? What do we do as a result of that? How do we know our interventions are working? So the link down below it's a really good kind of walkthrough tool with some varying questions around decision rules if you're looking at creating those. And just a little two-part, 2 decision rules. The first part is really making kind of that early warning system, that data chart. This is based on your data at the school level. It's not something that's set in stone. It can change throughout the years as your needs change, but kind of that low risk, at risk, high risk, and then you'd map out the various data sources to help you determine the students that are at the highest need. And then the second part is what does that mean? So if our students are showing at risk or high risk on X, Y, and Z indicators on this chart, then what does that mean? Do they get a tier 2 intervention? What intervention do we have? Kind of that same question. But it's important to have both parts because you can identify all of the risk that you have, but then if you don't have a plan for like what you do, it's not as effective. The chart is pretty, but we need to act on the information. And then a tier 2 intervention grid. This is an example from Michigan NeMTSS of what it could look like just to have the various interventions you have, what it means to enter that intervention, how are you monitoring that data, and then what does it mean to exit the intervention. So I'm going to let Jill take it away.
Perfect. Thanks, Mackenzie. All right, we are going to the last kind of piece that we are going to talk through and kind of provide you guys some examples around is that progress monitoring when we're thinking about database decision making. And Emily mentioned earlier that framework document. The really cool piece too about that framework document is there's also a shared glossary of terms within there. And she may have mentioned that earlier, but it's a really cool piece so that we're really all on the same page when we're thinking about that terminology, when we're talking about some of those pieces. And so we wanted to share, excuse me, the progress monitoring. So the standardized process of evaluating progress toward a performance target based on those rates of improvement is really that definition when we're thinking about progress monitoring. And we're going to dig a little bit into just providing a few examples and some resources that you guys can also explore for some additional just kind of ideas, some templates, things like that around those tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 supports. And so fidelity, progress monitoring, and systems. So when we're thinking about fidelity really is that degree to which that program, that curriculum, that intervention is implemented as designed, either through that research or through being developed through the problem-solving team. And when we're thinking about that terminology of implemented as designed, that's going to mean the amount of time provided. That's also going to mean the quality of the delivery. So was each step of the protocol followed? Looking at the lesson plan, things like that. So fidelity, obviously a very important piece. And that first check of fidelity really is going to be looking at, are we doing this intervention as intended, so that we're getting those outcomes that we're expecting. And then also checking in on the students. Is the system of the intervention working well? How many students is that system working for? So all important pieces, all things that we really want to be sure that we're having conversations around and really implementing with that fidelity. On the next slide, we have, like I said, just a few resources to share with you. This one that you see here is an example of a tier 2, tier 3 intervention tracking form. We do have it linked on here as a resource for you guys. It's also in our Padlet. But you could use it, adapt it to your needs, just kind of a nice tool that, again, you could adapt to fit your needs, but it's an example of a way to really track those interventions, the number of students participating in those interventions, number of students responding, those students that are exited. So just kind of a good starting point that you could take and use or adapt. We also wanted to share, so as you can see here on this slide, we have some forms from Missouri PBIS. I would highly encourage you to take a look at that site. They have a ton of great resources around tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, especially when we're thinking about progress monitoring tools and some different resources to use for progress monitoring. But check out that link. We do have just a couple shared with you here on the slide. So the first one that you see is an example of a social skills intervention group lesson plan fidelity checklist. And then that second one, so the one there on the right, is a social skills intervention weekly progress report. So again, some just great starting points, some things that you could have some conversations with your team around, and some tools to be able to utilize. A couple other ones that we wanted to share with you as well. So again, we have a couple links on the slide here, but these are some resources again, when we're thinking about progress monitoring. That first one is a check-in, check-out system fidelity of implementation measure, and then a check-in, check-out daily practices fidelity checklist. And so if you click on that, it's a 2-page document. So again, a great resource. And the other one actually comes from Kimball High School. So again, could be adapted and changed. This particular one is a check-in, check-out document that was created specifically for that school, with their school-wide expectations being be respectful, responsible, safe, and then efforts. And so again, this one could be adapted, but being used for that check-in, check-out tracking tool. These ones, again, are linked on the slide. So if you click on the actual document for these, they will take you to those examples as well. But these are some self-report progress monitoring tools. These could be used for weekly, they could be used for bi-weekly, just to collect data and measure that progress for interventions given to students with those internalizing struggles. They are short tools, they are free tools, and again, they are linked in. The one on the right there, so that's just a nice scoring guide, especially for the pediatric symptom checklist. And again, these ones are in the Padlet as well, but also linked on the slide for you guys. Thinking about those resources that we just shared, I know we have our PBIS coaches, we have our early childhood specialist on the call right now. Anything that you guys would add to any of those examples? Then it's totally okay if not. I'm putting you on the spot. So
I don't think so, Jill, but I do think a lot of schools talk about how when they use those, they feel like it really makes them more mindful of their fidelity and the outcomes, and whether or not somebody is staying in an intervention and it's not working and they're not noticing that the function of their behavior maybe does not respond well to that intervention. So they need to change it, you know?
yeah, perfect. Great point. These next couple ones that you see here, these are, again, some examples for some tier 1, tier 2 flow charts. And kind of like Mary was saying there, really for determining which students might need those additional supports. Next, we kind of want to, go ahead.
Sorry, Jill.
You're fine.
I didn't know if that flow chart for early childhood, they use the BERS, the behavior incident report. I wasn't sure if that would, it talks about using the ASQ as a screener. I was still looking at it, but.
No, you're fine. Yes, so maybe some other pieces kind of depending on what they have available. So this was just an example specifically from Hitchcock County.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah, good question though. Next, we kind of just wanted to walk you through. So we gave some resources around that problem solving model. Like both Emily and Mackenzie had mentioned earlier, we linked in a template just with some reflective questions, just kind of around each step of that problem solving model. So we wanted to also just kind of provide a quick walkthrough of those steps, what that might look like with an example here. So this would be like a collaborative team problem solving example. So if we're taking a look at that identify step, really looking at what is the problem. So we have identified here. So in 8th grade, up to 60% of students have incomplete assignments at any given time. If we move into really taking a look at why is this occurring, so really that analyzing step, our factual bullet points here. So identifying the classes and teachers with the most missing assignments. So taking a look at that, analyzing those pieces of information, collecting student feedback on why assignments are missing. So perhaps that's a survey, maybe it's conversation with the students, but taking a look and digging kind of into why those assignments are missing. Most assignments are missing from science class. Students reported that there was some confusion with the assignments. There was some lack of time to be able to complete those assignments outside of the class time. So that could be what that looks like within that analyzing why it's occurring step. The next one, kind of taking a look at a plan and what could be done to solve it. So increasing that assignment completion in science class. What's that going to look like? So how are we going to implement that? Who is involved? What does that look like? When, where, how? So a couple bullet points here. So it might be pre-teaching and reinforcing students to ask for help. It might be integrating that time management strategy. So really talking about maybe scheduling, utilizing a planner, things like that, really teaching some of those strategies to help support that, providing tools maybe during like a homeroom, during study hall time, coaching and collaborating with science teachers, providing those strategies for clear direction and being able to really gauge that level of understanding within the classroom, and then providing that flexibility in either that homeroom or in that study hall time to be able to ask for help from those content area teachers especially. So that could be what it looks like during the implement stage. And then moving into the reflection, reflecting on what didn't work, step of that problem solving model. So collecting those weekly assignments, weekly assignment counts from science and seeing how many are missing, collecting that feedback on those checks for understanding as well. So just to kind of walk you through it, kind of give some examples at each of those different steps of the problem solving model and how useful it can be, just really walking through that. Thinking about the information that we shared around data today, we have a couple other just great resources from our regional support leads. So you guys may be familiar with these, but we did link in that part 1 and part 2 of the evidence-based strategies series. These are some great webinars. I would encourage you guys to check them out. We have a couple that are available, that part 1 and part 2, and they're continuing on in part 3 and part 4 that will be available soon. And then we have our exit ticket. We will drop that in the chat as well. So we would love for you guys to provide that input, provide information. Also, if you guys need a certificate of attendance, you can also select that as part of the exit ticket, and we will get that sent to you as well. And then lastly, just closing with our optimistic closure. So thinking about the information that we shared around data, around the problem solving model, we would love for you to just personally reflect on one opportunity where you could utilize that problem solving model within the next week. So you can certainly drop it in the chat if you would like, but just kind of do a little personal reflection, maybe write yourself a note thinking about how that might be utilized within your work. And then as always, feel free to reach out. We have our emails, our contact information there if you have any questions. Thanks so much for joining us this morning.